Привіт, це подкаст «Коли все має значення». Мене звати Ангеліна Кирякіна, а разом зі мною
Наталка Гуменюк.
І говоримо ми з Наталкою після її чергової далекої подорожі до Колумбії, звідки вона привезла ще одну неймовірно цікаву гостю, теж громадянку світу, журналістку Каталіну Gómez. Наталко, розкажи, будь ласка, як ви з нею познайомились і про що ви з нею говорили?
Каталіна Gómez працює в Україні з перших днів Великого вторгнення. Вона є громадянкою Колумбії, є колумбійкою за національністю, але вона воєнна кореспондентка, яка останні роки, десятиліття насамперед висвітлювала Близький Схід. І сама вона 2008-2009 постійно мешкає в Тегерані. Вона може там бути, в неї є родинні зв'язки, тому вона до 2022-го переважно висвітлювала Сирію, Афганістан, різні конфлікти на Близькому Сході, звісно, Іран як такий, але приїхала до України і постійно робить матеріали і для низки міжнародних видань насамперед. Вона працює кореспонденткою France 24 іспанською. І це одне з найбільших телевізійних видань іспаномовних, яке дивляться на континенті всьому, скажімо, і в Іспанії, і в Латинській Америці. І дописує вона переважно також до іспаномовних газет, які перебувають в Іспанії. Але, звісно, і для місцевої колумбійської аудиторії також. Тут перший рік вона провела більше часу в полі, ніж в Києві. Зараз вона мешкає між Тегераном і Києвом, що дуже незвично, напевно, звучить. Але я хочу додати ще одну річ. Ми всі також чули і знаємо, що Каталіна також є вцілілою, а в тій трагічній атаці у Краматорську, під час якої загинула Victoria Amelina, українська письменниця, наша колега. Вони тоді разом працювали. Власне, Вікторія попросилася долучитися до цієї поїздки. Там тоді була Каталіна, було двоє ще інших колумбійців, письменник Ектор Абад і Серхіо Харамільо, один з колумбійських політиків, який свого часу відповідав за переговорний процес, і також продюсер France 24, який завжди працює з Каталіною і робив дуже багато для того, щоб якось щось зробити. Але треба зрозуміти, що Каталіна також вціліла в цій ситуації.
Не постраждала?
Вона не постраждала, вона була тою людиною, яка там опікувалася всім, коли сталася ця трагедія. Але я хочу додати, для мене це було викликом, я багато часу провела з Каталіною. Каталіна сказала, що вона хоча журналістка. В той момент, коли поцілила ця ракета в піцерію в Краматорську, і коли все сталося, коли вони вціліли, а Вікторія загинула, вона загинула не в той самий день, вона померла пізніше, вона фактично не брала слухавку. Тобто вона могла відповісти знайомим, що з нею все гаразд, але вона не давала коментарів. Вона сказала, знаєш, я журналістка, я постійно в ефірі, вона такий працеголик, який дає коментарі, говорить, розповідає. Вона каже, я зрозуміла, що значить теж бути людиною, яка не може. От для мене ця травма спрацювала таким чином, що я не могла. Перший раз вона потім пояснила, що вона взагалі розказувала про цю історію і говорила про спогади з Володою Єрмоленком, другом Віки, близьким, який потім приїхав з Танею Гарковою в Дніпро, коли Віка вже вмирала, і вона поділилася цією історією з Володою. Але їй тяжко про це говорити. Для мене це було теж і важливо запитати з одного боку, так? А з іншого боку, я не наважилася поставити більше запитань. Я подумала, що цього достатньо, бо якщо для людини це трагічний досвід, тяжкий, і вона так з цим живе, і вона повернулася в Україну працювати після цього, да? Вона зняла тут квартиру, вона живе. Ось це, що вона зробила. Мені здається, що достатньо було почути того, що вона сказала.
Що в історії роботи Каталіни, саме в частині України, що для неї є визначальним стало? Чим Україна для неї відрізняється від інших конфліктів, війн, які вона висвітлювала?
Вона дуже любить цю країну, тому що вона завжди її висвітлює з точки зору людей. Вона сказала, що зазвичай вона дуже багато працює з правозахисною темою, з потерпілими, але вона дуже багато часу проводить і провела з українськими військовими. Але з чого ми почали і чому цікавий погляд, вона говорить про те, що всі ми маємо бути критичними. Але вона вважає свій погляд особливим, тому що він відрізняється від погляду, скажімо так, людини, яка приїхала умовно з якогось великого західного міста і розказує, як має бути. Бо вона каже, я живу в контексті, де я розумію, що ніхто не ідеальний. Є в Україні проблеми? Є. Є проблеми в армії? Є. Але ми маємо зрозуміти, що ніхто не ідеальний, жодна демократія не ідеальна. Це для нас боротьба, і ми говорили, власне, про ту відсутність зверхності у формулюваннях, коли ти бачиш проблеми, і коли ти про проблеми, які існують в Україні під час війни, говориш як про виклик, а не як критику, яка каже, ось ви якісь там не такі, а має бути ось так.
Як вона бачить своє завдання для іспаномовної аудиторії? Наскільки далекою для нас є іспаномовна аудиторія, що для неї є новим, а з чим вона і так дуже добре знайома, в тому числі завдяки її роботі?
Ми говорили про розуміння страждань, до якого люди ставляться, які пережили щось трагічне, ставляться з повагою, а не тільки зі співчуттям. І це той ключ до розуміння нас людьми на континенті, на якому багато проблем. Виходячи з того, як я з нею говорила, тому що я не є іспаномовною людиною, я не можу повністю читати, як багато вона робить, але я додам контекст нашої розмови, де вона відбулася. Я була на запрошення Каталіни в Боготі і потім в Картагені на Габо-фесті. Це фестиваль Габріель Гарсія Маркеса, якого всі знаємо як видатного письменника, але для колумбійців він насамперед журналіст, тобто це репортер. Це людина, через яку більшість людей в іспаномовному світі вирішила, я хочу бути геніальним репортером. Це найголовніший фестиваль для іспаномовної журналістики, куди приїздять там люди з Аргентини, з Мадрида, з Чилі, з усіх країн Мексики, щоб отримати, по-перше, нагороди за свою роботу, за свої матеріали і спілкуватися. І я на цьому фестивалі була, здається, єдиною людиною, яка не знала іспанську. Дякую Каталіні, яка мною опікувалася, але Каталіна напередодні разом з керівництвом цього фестивалю, треба розуміти, що Гонсало Маркес є в керівництві цього фонду Габо, це син Маркеса, провели воркшоп. Каталіна була керівницею цього воркшопу, який тривав 3 дні для ключових редакторів і журналістів з Латинської Америки про те, як розібратися і висвітлювати складнощі російського вторгнення в Україну. Я читала частину цього воркшопу, але загалом він тривав 3 дні, там в мене було півдня. Але в момент, коли ми кажемо, що Україна нікого не цікавить, уявіть, є великий фестиваль, а перед ним...
собі 3 дні. Тут буває одна панельна дискусія, де тобі дають 3 хвилини.
17 редакторів і реальних редакторів з великих видань я спілкувалася з ними, приїжджають, щоб 3 дні дізнатися більше, як працювати з темою висвітлення війни Росії проти України. Додам, що Каталіна була трошечки здивована, що зрештою, попри всі глибокі людські історії, іспаномовні редактори все одно, зрештою, підчали історії більше про те, як ця війна впливає на Латинську Америку. Хоча її більше цікавить історія, що відбувається з Україною, що відбувається з українцями. І додам, що Габо-фест так само дав нам з Каталіною 2 дискусії, і одна з цих дискусій – це була заключна дискусія фестивалю, коли там всі збираються в великому театрі, після якого видання «Ель Паїс» іспанське робить виставу. Теж це розповіді журналістів про певні історії з України. Про жінку, яка висаджує квіти в Краматорську, про водія, який возить автобус в Бахмут, про ЛГБТ-активіста, який воює, про родини військових. І тому мені здається, що в цій складній історії, коли ми розуміємо, що цей континент ніби дуже далекий, будучи там, я зрозуміла щось завдяки таким людям, як вона, буквально. Він на трошечки, тобто в цей момент, коли ми боїмося там випасти з повістки світової, коли щось відбувається в США, щось відбувається в Європі, вони все-таки ухвалюють рішення і дають нам можливість, майданчик, говорити про Україну.
Питання трошки вбік. Враховуючи, де живе Каталіна. Я свого часу теж, в мене був певний період життя, я була пов'язана з Іраном, бувала в Тегерані, і я не змогла продовжувати там бути журналісткою. Це, звісно, накладає дуже великі ризики на людей, з якими ти там пов'язана. Як це вдається Каталіні?
Вона дуже переживає, що рано чи пізно це завершиться. Тобто в неї є через сімейний статус можливість там жити. Там в неї чоловік іранець, але страшенно переживає, що рано чи пізно можуть і її якось заборонити діяльність.
Ходіння по лезу, да.
Але вона працює повноцінно, і ми говорили про це, як там, якщо щось відбувається, і там доводиться там їхати швидко в Тегеран, бо вона чи не єдина, хто може завдяки цьому статусу. І я додам, що, звісно, ми говорили про Іран. І я говорила з одного боку частково про те, що відбувається з іранським суспільством, з протестами, з жінками, але також в контексті України, в контексті того, а як ставиться це суспільство
до іранських шахедів в Україні.
До іранських шахедів в Україні. Чому вони про це не говорять? Як насправді зі зміною? Ми говорили буквально на наступний день після перемоги кандидата-реформатора на іранських виборах, президента. Ми знаємо, що попередній президент загинув в авіатрощі. Вибори були напередодні розмови, і дивовижно виграв все-таки реформіст. Ми говорили про те, на що це вплине, чи це вплине якось на зовнішню політику, чи це просто якесь там пару дадуть випустити суспільству, але от мені було цікаво теж, звісно, запитувати про ось цей момент ставлення до України, бо вона все-таки живе на ці дві країни, і їй дві важливі. Але ще одна тема, яку я маю додати, і яка є нова для неї частково, фільм, над яким вона зараз працює, майже 4 тисячі колумбійців воюють в Україні зараз. Ми говорили про це, вона зараз робить про цей фільм. Ця держава дозволяє своїм громадянам служити в інших країнах. І заробітня платня 100 тисяч гривень – це доволі велика заробітня платня для Колумбії.
Більше $2000.
Дуже велика. Треба пам'ятати, що це країна, в якій понад 40 років точилася громадянська війна, країна, в якій дуже багато колишніх військових, колишніх бійців, армія і люди зі зброєю посідають дуже важливе місце. Вони, особливо ті, які воювали, для них це робота. Вони нормально для цього ставляться. Це мілітаризоване суспільство. І вони можуть їхати воювати, можуть працювати охоронцями, тобто їм є куди застосувати себе. Коли я спілкувалася ще з іншими колумбійськими журналістами там, мені багато хто згадував, що ось тут я говорив, не знаю, зустрів когось, і там колишній охоронець президента Колумбії поїхав в Україну воювати. Їх дійсно багато. Це велике питання для України, тому що як про це комунікувати зсередини, тому що, на жаль, дуже мало інформації на офіційних сторінках навіть Міністерства оборони іспанською мовою про умови служби. Тобто англійською вони є, а іспанською дуже багато бракує. В нас бракує іспаномовних перекладачів. Ми говорили про те, хто ці люди, що з ними, яка їхня мотивація. І їх зараз певна кількість збільшується, тому що це як сарафанне радіо. Один поїхав, другий поїхав, третій поїхав. Є люди, які загинули. Тобто це великий феномен. І мені здається, нам треба буде десь окремо про нього, як суспільство, теж зрозуміти, як правильно поводитися, знаючи, що ми просто не знаємо цієї мови, і ці люди переважно не знають англійської мови. І це, дуже важливо розуміти.
Боже, як цікаво. І які, полярно різні абсолютно теми ви з Каталіною обговорили. Ну що, давайте слухати розмову Наталки з колумбійсько-іранською журналісткою Каталіною Gómez, яка працює останнім часом в Україні. Давайте слухати.
Catalina, thank you so much for making me come to Colombia and to Gabo Fest, which is, I underestimated how big this event is, and it's such an opportunity to speak to the audience here in Latin America and talk to you in Colombia. I want really you to explain a bit your work, because we know you as a Colombian journalist who working in Ukraine. You actually live in Ukraine, like partially now, and you experience in reporting wars. But there is something special. You live in Tehran. So explain a bit your career. You're a Colombian journalist, but your experience is a bit way broader, and the way you work and from where you're coming. So
sometimes it's complicated. At the beginning, sometimes when I was explaining in Ukraine, no, listen, I'm Colombian, but I live in Iran. It was very complicated. But the reason is I moved to Iran in 2007 because I always wanted to be a correspondent. I was at that moment really obsessed with Middle East. But at the same time, I knew kind of foreign policy of Iran. I have done a master's degree in international politics, and I focus in Iran in international policies. We are talking about time of the reformist president Mohammad Khatami. Then I moved to Iran. And it took me a long time until I got the moment that I got my residency in Iran. As a foreign journalist, that there are very little. Then, since that, I move all around the region, especially in the Middle East, covering different kind of wars and conflicts and social movements, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Gaza, and many others. And actually, I believe that this is the area where I know how to work. That's why for me, when the full-scale invasion, actually in 2014, I didn't go to Ukraine because I was focused in Syria and in Iraq. I didn't go because I thought that this was not the area I knew. And when full-scale invasion came, they asked me to support the team of France 24 Spanish in Ukraine, and little by little, I am still, after 2 years and a half, spending more time in Ukraine than in Iran, other place.
I'll ask about Iran and the Middle East. It's a very relevant experience, but obviously for our audience in Ukraine, they want to learn about your experience. My first would be something came up with our conversation. Lenses through which you see this war. I'm, for the last months, is kind of quite a lot in Latin America, and I see there is something, this experience of resilience. We kind of understand each other better. So what is the difference you think in the coverage you do than like the perspective then that would be, a European, an American, a New Yorker reporter?
I don't know if you can notice in my report, but for sure, as a person, I have different kind of approach because I'm coming from a country. I grew up in a very difficult moment of Colombia. 80s and 90s were very difficult. We are talking about Pablo Escobar. We are talking about this war about the mafia against the government. We are talking about the guerrilla was in a really moment of the war of this country. They were killing journalists. One of the directors of the most important newspaper in Colombia, El Espectador, Guillermo Cano, was killed when I was a young lady. And for me, that has a huge impact. I already wanted to be a journalist by then. Then I understand that two things. First of all, that we don't have perfect countries. We can't pretend to ask our governments, our societies to behave and to respond in a perfect kind of way because nothing is perfect. But we are learning in the process and we are surviving and we are fighting in that process like the Ukrainians are doing. And they are fighting, they are supporting the army, they are supporting and defending the country, but at the same time are challenging the institutions and trying to defend and to make the country better, challenge the institutions to have less corruption, having the journalists fighting for have the freedom of expression and freedom of media. These are things we have been living in Colombia forever. Then, for me, I don't pretend to expect a perfect Ukraine country like everything works perfect. No. Ukraine is a country that is in a process, like Colombia and many countries in Latin America. And this is what I pretend to understand in the moment to cover Ukraine. Not to pretend that everything has to go in a perfect way. And I try to pretend that and to show that in my reports.
What are these different questions, people you meet? So what is the difference, in the way you ask the questions, in the way you choose the stories?
I think it's not the way the people you choose, it's the way you approach the questions, it's the way you treat them. I give a lot of hugs. I touch a lot. I talk a lot before putting the microphone. How are you? I'm trying to understand, having this kind of human touch when it's possible. Of course, sometimes things are going so fast, but I always try to make that this person don't feel that is used to have an interview, a quote from me. I do it from the deep of my heart, that I really respect her pain and his pain and their situation because what is living. Then I don't really try to be aggressive. And in the moments that sometimes you have to do it, I really always regret myself. And I really give hugs, kisses. In Ukraine, sometimes people are not really used to that, but people are always very kind and ended up being very open. And when you say that you are Colombian, Natalia, sometimes people don't want to give you an interview. And when they know that you are Colombian, they open their hearts. They tell you the story. They tell you thank you for coming to here to tell my story.
How do you explain that?
I say, listen, we need to tell your story. I'm here to tell because we need to explain to people in Latin America and in my country what is going on. Your story and your fight is very big.
Then I would ask, because this is a question I'm often asked for the last months is when I'm like far away, why Latin America, matters. But that's why, how would you explain why for these people in Ukraine, why do they care that people in Colombia think that way? In Colombia, not in Washington, which gives them weapon.
I tell them basically, I need to tell your story because they need to understand what are you going through. And this is my only way. If you don't tell me your story, I will never be able to tell you them what is happening in Ukraine and why we are here and why you are suffering and why Ukraine needs to defend itself. And we need also sometimes, I say, we need to fight against the propaganda because people are very confused in Latin America. Russians are amazing, confusing people. Please, then people are very, very kind, come and tell the story. Soldiers too. I mean, I have met many soldiers in Bakhmut, in places, having coffee and I say I'm Colombia, and they are ready to help, to show me the reality. That's very beautiful.
So you were in all the dangerous places, Bakhmut, everywhere. You actually spent first months in Mykolaiv. How different is this war from the other wars you covered?
Basically, because this war is huge. I just remember to having this feeling of big power attacking me in Syria at the beginning, in Aleppo and in that part when every morning, every afternoon, the planes of Bashar al-Assad or the Russians were coming and they were bombarding us and we didn't know where these bombs were coming. But the dimension of this is nothing compared with what we have been living in Ukraine. The attacks can come any moment, any place. There is no place where you are really safe. I will never forget, I've been in the front line more before spending more time in Kyiv. At the beginning, I didn't even spend more than 3 or 4 days every trip in Kyiv because I was all around, along the front line. But when I spent my first month living in Kyiv, that it was May of 2023, that all of us will forget, how Russia was attacking Kyiv. And the first night the Patriots really worked that night. It was like the Star Wars. I will never forget. You really understand that this is another dimension of war. It can get to you any place. Nobody is safe. And also the magnitude of suffering. Of course, there is a magnitude of suffering in Sudan, in Gaza, in Iraq, what we saw in Syria, everywhere, but also the magnitude of suffering in Ukraine because it's such a big country. It's huge.
Now, you're working on the documentary about Colombians coming to fight to Ukraine. You'll keep some of the things for the film, but generally, can you a bit explain to Ukrainians why all of a sudden we have quite a lot of Colombians fighting in Ukraine? Yes, there was a story about Foreign Legion in Ukraine in the beginning. We can discuss how successful it was, but it's very hard to accommodate. There were some smaller people from various countries, but there is some specific phenomenon of the Colombian fighters. What it is?
The phenomenon, it's clear. Colombians have been exporting militaries fighting in another wars since many years ago. Why? Because we used to have big army. We were a country in war. We trained for so many years and decades, generations of people coming especially from rural and deprived areas that really saw a way to progress and to go ahead in their society, being militaries, police, intelligence, okay? Then when these people retire from these institutions, because it's 20 years of service or because they decide to go, they go to another jobs also related with security. Colombia, we signed this peace agreement years ago, but still Colombia is an insecure country. There is a big demanding for security organizations, bodyguards, people who work in companies and so on. And these people, many of these ex-soldiers, the most professionals were working, I would say, in that as a mercenaries with these contract companies with Americans working with the militaries in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Yemen. But when the Ukrainian war started, many of these militaries that already have some experience, they wanted to go to support because it's not just about that they knew that Ukraine wanted. It's also because people who have been fighting and grow up as militaries, they miss it. It's something people who know how to live in war, they miss it. Then they saw an opportunity to go to join the Ukrainian army and institutions with a quite a good salary compared with what they earn in Colombia. That is totally true. And there is a 50 or 60 depend or 70 depend of factor of money, but also because some of them were really wanted to say, I know how to fight. I grew up in this. I'm prepared for this. I can help this country, because talking to them, they understand that Ukraine has been invaded, abused, and they are not just them for money. They believe that they are in the right side of the story. Also, they went to Ukraine, and little by little, it's becoming huge, because ones who go there, they tell the ones who are here. The ones who are here in Colombia are saving money because it's very expensive for them to get to Ukraine. They need to lend money to sell their moto, the car, the things like that. They sell because they believe that they are going, if they success, they are going to be able to help their family back here. And this is a phenomenon. And more of them are arriving, but more and more of them are realizing that the front lines these days are very difficult because they go to the front line. They don't go to any other position.
And it's not like the guerrilla jungle war. It's artillery, it's shelling, it's something.
Natal, they really agree. The most experienced Colombian militaries, the most commando, big special forces that I have been interviewing, they say that this is like a kid's war in Colombia compared what they live in Ukraine. They say is nothing to compare. The only thing we can say that we know is that we know how to hold a gun, how to refill it, and how to fight man to man. But additional to that, we don't have any, because this is totally different war. They teach to do, for example, going in helicopters, do special missions, nothing to do what they do in Ukraine. They know how to fight, and they are good fighters. And every Ukrainian I also have talked, they told me most of them are good fighters.
What do you think Ukraine can do more for these people? Because I really understand the problem of people coming speaking Spanish to Ukrainian platoon where probably nobody speaks Spanish. I recently heard an interesting anecdote that a Ukrainian man who was working as a work in Portugal, learned some Portuguese, and he can communicate with this man. I really understand it's not exactly how it should be, but I do understand it's really not easy. Ukrainian society is not really ready for that.
It's extremely difficult for them, and believe me, I've been working with these guys already for quite a long time. Most of them are fantastic persons. They just want to help, have better life, and to do the only thing that they know is to have an arm in their hands and to fight a war. But they don't understand the language. Most of them don't even speak English. And they confront with a country in war. And we know, covering Ukraine, that all the brigades not always work the same, not all the commanders. And they are finding knocking themselves against a big wall. Because when they are fighting, it's fine. They do their job. Some brigades are better than others. Sometimes some of them they like more than others because the commanders sometimes. The big problems start when they get injured. Then they send them to the hospitals, and they always will say the treatment in the hospitals is fantastic. They are very kind. They treat us better than in Colombia when we were in the military hospital there is. But after 4 months, sometimes some commanders of brigades, they forget them. They are still in the process. I know some of them who has been taken out of the hospitals because the commander doesn't want to push for a medical committee to check his cases. Nobody understand them and explain to them some rules that after 4 months they don't pay the salary until this medical committee. Then there is a lot of problem of communication. And I did a report, and the thing is, some of these rules are not even translated to Spanish in the defense minister page. I think everything will be more clear if they understand that they have this huge amount of Spanish speakers, and they make all the things very clear of how it works. When do you can ask for this compensation? How many months will you have to wait until the salary will come? How much money will they will pay you if you are in the front line or you are not in the front line? All these things, because Ukraine is clear, but they don't know. And there is a lot of rumors among them. It's very sad because we have to bring this to light. Some commanders, because they are afraid of denouncing these cases because they believe that they would sometimes, I don't know, threaten them or something bad. They are not denouncing this case. And I think it's a moment to Ukraine to understand that these people are making a big sacrifice, but also try to help them more.
Yeah, that's also something which I really, really want to stress. And that's why I really ask, because I do think like if people already came there, you need to help them. And, I've seen just one incident, and it was in the airport in Warsaw, where definitely there was, I would guess, Colombian who didn't speak a word of English. It was hard for him, everything, to understand where to go, to buy a coffee. I didn't speak Spanish, and I thought it's already difficult, but how you can find yourself somewhere in Kupiansk, in, somewhere near Lipsy, what that would be.
It's crazy. They don't know sometimes. I know some of them that they already know the map of Ukraine and they know the single name of the towns. Other ones, it's so big. It's a very difficult
What is
country.
Ukraine for them? They say about Ukraine.
First of all, they found Ukraine so beautiful, but they found this European country. They found also the European dream, because for them, Ukraine is totally European. And they always say that the Ukrainians people are really kind with them, that the people, when they see that there are foreigners that are Colombian, even they don't learn the language, they come, they say, thank you for being here. For example, if they are asking a Coca-Cola or something, they do it for free because people really appreciate what they are doing. Some of them, I would say, I haven't talked to all of them because there are many, but I would say that they have a really big love for the country, and they really understand the suffering, and they really understand, and they tell me, I don't understand why these old ladies have to leave their house with everything, with the dogs and the cats, and especially now what happened in Bokchansk and Lipsy, some of them are fighting in Kharkiv. For them has been very impacted. They are very surprised with Ukraine, and some of them want to live in Ukraine. Do you know there are some already married with an Ukrainian?
No doubt. That's what I definitely have no doubt. That's for sure.
They found Ukrainians very beautiful and very elegant women.
Catalina, there is no way I won't speak, because in this war, in particular in this war, you've been in a lot of different situations through your life, but you're a survivor of the attack in Kramatorsk, in which Victoria Amelina didn't survive. But there were three of you, Colombian writer Hector Abad, Sergio Jaramillo as a politician, and Victoria, who joined you. But you were there all the time. How did you return to the work after being a survivor?
With us was also, I always try to remind him, Dmitry Kovalchuk, that is a journalist and producer Ukrainian who was seated with us and always helped us a lot. Without Dmitry, really, believe me, we wouldn't have made it that day and after. Why I come back? First of all, because in wars, these things happen. You are ready for an attack. We grew up in Colombia where the car bombs were all the time, anywhere. We knew that we could go to the corner and car bomb could explode. It's not the same as a missile, but sometimes it's very close. But what you are never ready is to lose a friend beside you in an attack. This, you are never ready to lose someone who is behind you in the same table, just few centimeters. But I knew that my job, chosen this war, to tell the story of the people, to tell the story of what is going on in a country in war like Ukraine, and to keep these testimonies of what is going on, the good and the bad. I feel that I needed to continue to be with Ukrainians. I couldn't abandon them because, I was attacked, my friend died, then I wash my hands and I go and finito, I will start my life again. No, because I don't think it's honest with any one of you, and not with me, and not with the memory of Victoria and the people who died in Kramatorsk or in many other attacks like that. It was difficult. I wouldn't say that. The first time I come back to the front line, it was in Zaporizhia front line with the counteroffensive. You know that Zaporizhia is very difficult landscape because nothing protects you, just this line of trees. But it was the most difficult coverage of my life. I was jumping all the time. My heart was hitting. And I said, I need to keep here. I saw that it was going to be easy. When I see it from now, 1 year ago, I know that I've been through difficult moments. Probably I'm not the same person. I can't work as quickly and fast as I used to work before. But I am very proud and to be able to keep telling the story of Ukraine.
You told me that, for you it was almost impossible to answer the phone calls. And you were the journalist at that day to tell this story because, you are part of it. But how did it was seen here in Colombia and what is going on with the memory of Victoria? To be honest, we can't do nothing to return her. And you still think like what you can do. But I understand that you like trying.
The voice of Victoria, the presence of Victoria is very much present in this country. I think for many reasons, when she was here in the festival, in the High Festival with Alexandra Matvichuk and Sofia Shak and Andriy Korkov, in the first time that this delegation of Ukrainians came here to talk about Ukraine in 2023 in January, her voice was very in many places because she was so kind, generous with journalists, with everyone telling this story. Then when it happened, and this attack happened, it was not just about, of course, Hector and Sergio, they are very famous in this country for obvious reasons. But also everyone remembered who was this blonde Ukrainian woman, very white, that was being here. And I think articles, people start talking about her. I couldn't. My way of reacting to that was silence. And it was very bad because it shouldn't be like that because something that was Victoria she was very present everywhere, not just in Latin America, in Britain, in Europe, in Spain. She was in her Twitter, in her Instagram. She was a very powerful voice for Ukraine. For me, I lost a really good friend and I will never have to deal with that and all the things that would come with you when someone who is with you died and you don't die. That is a conversation that you will have all your life. But also what really is painful for me is how powerful voice Victoria was, and Ukraine lost a very power. I know that there are many of you, many of you that are around the world telling the story of Ukraine. But for me, she is a present every day of my life. But I know that in Colombia and in many places also her image is very, very much there. They always remember this attack and they always remember how this beautiful, clever, sharp and brave Ukrainian writer died in that attack. And also, it's very sad. There were another 12 people and other very young Ukrainians who died in that attack, but they always remember her.
Maybe you can briefly explain, because I understand you don't live here, but just generally more or less a public perception to extent about Ukraine in Colombia. It's really different from a lot of countries in Latin America because also the history of Colombia is a bit different. It's not really exactly like Argentina, Brazil. There is a different issue with the left and right. There is also the whole war and guerrillas and something. So what is the kind of sentiments on Ukraine in general, in the major press in Colombia, in the society?
In the major press, everyone has been covering Ukraine and really understanding that Ukraine has been a country who has been attacked. Ukraine is the victim. In the media, in the hardcore of the society, this is very clear. Colombians understand what is to live in war, in uncertainty, in displacement. We used to have, before Syria, the largest displacement community, internal community in the world. Many of these guys who are fighting in Ukraine with Ukrainian army are people who know what is to leave their house and to be IDPs. So many of them are coming from conflict areas and they are IDPs themselves. Then they understand what the war means. It's not that just they are fighters. They are victims of the war itself. Of course, you get this government who say that they want to put position, that they want Listen, I don't think this is the majority.
So what's the government position?
This is a big question. Listen, the government only in this year, 2 years, more than a half that had been since the full-scale invasion, just condemned one attack of Russia, and was the attack of Ria in Kramatorsk. Why? Because I think they couldn't do something that. It was in the press. It was everywhere. It was obvious that people, the majority, and we were civilians or militaries not in their duties. And Colombia understand that. They understood that it was a war crime. And then he has to go out to condemn this attack, the president and the foreign minister. It took him a couple of days. And but they never condemn when Russia, the embassy here, say that, okay, we shouldn't be as Colombian trying the Ukrainian cuisine in a workplace like Kramatorsk. They were making fun of us. This was the reaction of the Russian embassy here in Colombia. And since then, this government, for example, don't forget, he was going to the peace summit in Switzerland. He was already in Europe. And hours before going to Switzerland, he canceled. He said, because Russia is not going to be there. Of course he knew. He is very isolated and he just wants to do what he wants to do. He's very bad advice. Or he is someone who just want to, I don't know really which is really the position of this government. Of course, what is true is that they are asking for negotiation, peace, but without really understanding and putting in the position where Ukraine is today. Then I don't think many people, of course, they're followers, but I don't think even I would say people who support him would understand that the Ukrainians are victims of this war.
I wouldn't go for that because, of course, there is a very special kind of the whole theme about the negotiations in Colombia between the guerrillas and the government after the war, which lasted decades. Which happened some years ago, and then there were quite a lot of things, like people voted against it, but there was a peace process, very long. And I should say, it was also during the time when we had this Minsk agreement, so we were following to extent. And there is always this temptation to kind of compare, temptation to understand, but sometimes need to learn. You live in the Middle East. You covered the war. You're definitely not the specialist, but still there is no way for me just totally avoid to say that. So what's going on?
I wish I knew better what is going on. I know that the situation in areas where the peace process was made, where the guerrilla left their guns and they come back to the civilian life, are in problems again. Not with dissidencias, we call these groups who didn't want to follow the peace process and they took their arms again, but we also have many other kind of groups, and you have to understand the huge problem that we have with the cartels of drugs and the drug business, not just in Colombia. I think it's something that is huge in Latin America. And of course, in this big map that is the cartels of drugs in all this part of the world, Colombia always have played a really important position. And I put you in another way. Many of the reasons these guys sometimes they go to fight in Ukraine, it's because the life in their towns in the middle of nowhere is so dangerous these days. Some of them have told me that for them is more secure these days to be in Ukraine, even though that when they go to the zero line, probably they can die. But even if they are alive in the normal life, it's more secure to leave them in Ukraine than to Colombia. Because you have to understand that they live, many of them, in these areas where the war and the presence of these cartels and these militias are very present. I know that the Colombians who know the war very well say that we are far away to come back to the moment we were decades ago or years ago before the peace agreement. This is true. But also the situation, sadly, is deteriorating, and the insecurity and the war is back in many areas of my country.
Just also still want to say to the Ukrainians who had not such a privilege as myself to be in Bogota, how beautiful this country is, how great the city is, surrounded by mountains, very modern, very pleasant. And we now here at the Gabo Festival, which is the festival of, by the foundation of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which is like the crown
of the Spanish-speaking journalism where all celebrities from Mexico, Rio, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Madrid, Barcelona, coming to get this award in the fancy ceremony and in very hipsterish, cool environment, which we are here now. I have a question, which is maybe very strange, but I want to move later for Tehran and something, but there is no way. There is this festival, Gabo Festival, and you see that the figure of Gabriel Garcia Marquez is so big. And he is genius. He is absolutely like incredible writer, and so many Ukrainians, adore his writing. But he's here known, first of all, as a journalist who did a lot, which we didn't know. There was something puzzling for me when I read a lot of Garcia. I was a huge fan, of course. Quite recently, I reread some of his journalistic works, in particular covering the Cuban Revolution and like the fights in Angola. It felt pretty much weird, in particular his reporting when he came from, with the Cubans in disguise who pretended to be civilians, farmers, to fight in Angola. And it also, I really now thinking, it looked like some Russian spin doctors read Marquez and then created this kind of DNR, but, in the caricature way, not in this way. How you really explain also, Marquez politically because of his proximity to Castro, to Cuba, to all the troubles, and, how you see his wholesome thing and his legacy?
I'm not an expert in Garcia Marquez, for sure, as a Colombian. This was his most of his controversial phase. His friendship with Fidel Castro and the support of the Cuban Revolution and the communism. And all these things for many years was very controversial. Of course, he was so admired in his writing, in his novels, in the magnitude. And you have to understand that when he won the Nobel Prize, Colombia was totally isolated country. If you wanted to buy something in the foreigner, you have to buy something called the black market or the special shops. Then imagine how isolated and Colombia was living in that moment. Then Gabo, it was a very contradiction from Colombia because at the same moment he was the most important value of this country with the coffee and the emeralds, but nothing compared with Gabo and probably Botero too. I'm talking about Botero, that is a painter that is very famous for painting these fat women that become also very famous and recognized around the world, but nothing like Garcia Marquez. But also this political and this support. That's why at the end of his days, these things started to fade out and trying to forget it and not to talk too much. But yes, Colombians, we know that this is something that was.
But, so what was the journalism he as well? So for what he admired? We were at the ceremony yesterday and I was listening hours of Spanish, which I don't understand, about people speaking how important Gabriel Garcia Marquez was, including the mayor of Bogota, who was like really quoting. It's everywhere. So tell us about us journalists, Marquez as a journalist.
Marquez as a journalist was something that is the master or the journalist all of us one day we will like to be with and probably will never make. It's what we call in Spanish the olfato, the sniff. You know where the story is. You know, probably not the most breaking news, but you know where is the story. And it's not just about the story. How you will tell that story. He's a master in that. We call chronicas. It's not a report. It's this like more literary way of telling these stories that for us in Spanish that he was the master. He was writing that in the Espectador. And everyone was expecting to read him. And when they were sending him to cover like you and me news in another country, he will always come from telling the story because the story was always there, but from different kind of approach, always surprising you. And in a very, also doing that, very literary, very well written, very beautiful and amazing, but also fact checking. He was obsessed of fact checking and being very precise in every single thing that he was writing. That's why Gabo is a master not just for Colombians. If you see in Latin America, he is the journalist.
But I wanted to ask you about Iran. Everybody who lived in Iran, whom I knew and have been to Iran, I've been there twice for reporting reason, fell in love with the country, not with the state. For me, it's very hard to say it now today as a Ukrainian, because, Iranians in opposition hate when Ukrainians say Iranians drones. But for us, it's the country which is now also fighting Ukraine. It's not just another dictatorship, authoritarian country, and other kind of difficult regime somewhere. It's really the country which assists Russia with a very particular deadly weapon. But I know, it also has this complexity, vibrant society, which goes to the street, then they are persecuted, then there is tensions. Maybe we can't cover the whole Iran as such, but for you, how do you look at that? Not from the perspective of the, I understand Iranian opposition who fighting mullahs, who fighting repressions, this movement of women who are fighting for their freedoms, but also knowing that there is this thing, but there is also something Iran is doing to Ukraine. How you now explain where Iran is?
Iran is a very sensitive subject that they don't really want to talk about, these Shahid drones that they really sell, and they always try to fade out because they know. Listen what happened in the elections, not in the second round, that there was almost 50% of participation because people decided to go to vote to elect this more moderate, kind of open mind, more sophisticated leader that is Masoud Pezeshkian, because the other one was totally ideological, close, traditional, and they knew that they were going to bring Iran even to more years behind. But they know that the society doesn't support this position of Iran, not just selling these drones and taking position, because how they sell it to Iran? Listen, Iran lived a war in the 80s. Iran is not 1 century ago and was attacked by the neighbor, that was Iraq. More than 1 million people from both sides died. That extended 8 years and was extremely painful. Iranians know what besides coming to Tehran, not just to the borders, means. Iranians know what to have such a number of people dying that they call the martyrs. How many people have still physical mental consequences of this war when Saddam attacked them with chemical attacks, sometimes with the support of the West, because it started and of that. Then it's very difficult to say why we are supporting a country that is attacking another sovereign and independent country. They will always find a way that is because the West, the NATO pushed too much, But they know that this speech will not get to the majority of the Iranians. That's why they keep it very low. As they keep very low, the support for Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Islamic resistance. I mean, it's not, they talk, and every day sometimes they talk more, because now with Gaza, they feel that they can't do it because population support, and they are very, with the some of them, population of Gaza. But believe me, the majority of the Iranian society understand very well where Ukrainians are and what is happening to Ukrainians.
So the podcast would be broadcasted sometime after these days, but we are there in the day when we know the elections that these reformist candidates won. Can you a bit explain first one thing, which I think any journalist would be challenged, explaining that you do have elections in Iran. They are like real elections. Wherever you say, there are obstacles to who is going to, allowed to be there, but it's not like in Russia, it's not like in North Korea. There are elections, there are real elections. No. So who won? What is this? What really happened?
It's important for Ukrainians to understand that Iranians, in the political, in the foreign policy, but also in the society, they don't trust America at all, of course, and Israelis and the West. But they don't trust historically the Russians. Because Russia historically betrayed Iranians many times, then they know exactly that they can betray them. And that's why, for example, probably, because I've been researching in Ukraine, they have seen North Koreans missiles, but as far as I understand, there is no proof now. Of course, Shahids number, thousands. But I think there are not proof that there are Iranian missiles. You remember that at some moment they were telling that Iran was going to send two missiles. I think there was a political decision at the end not to sell these missiles to Russia for some reasons that you see. Coming back to elections, it's a very sophisticated and very complex system. The Islamic Republic system has two dimensions. The one who is elected by popular vote and the other one who is elected by these institutions who are elected by this popular vote. Is very complex. Then, of course, the supreme leader is elected by the committee of experts that at the same time is elected by the population. But what is the point here? None of these candidates, not clerics who go to the committee experts, no the people who go to parliament, no the people who go to presidents. They can say, I'm Natalia Gumeyuk and Catalina Gómez, I want to be a president of this country. They can do it. But you present your name, and there is this committee, very, very black, the way they selected, and very difficult to understand, and very radical committee that's called the Council of Guardians. 12 people, experts in Islamic law, 6 of them at least clerics, many of them very old, who take this CV and say, Natalia is not enough revolutionary, not enough Islamic. You are not allowed to be honest. There is no criterion. Sometimes you are accepted, and the next elections they will not accept it, and nobody knows. This is what makes the Iranian elections totally unfair, because these candidates who ended up being in the final list are selected by someone in the system, by some criteria in the system that makes not democratic at all. Once you are in the run, usually, I have to say, sometimes it goes very clear, because otherwise, last week, in the first round of these elections, it was just 40% of participation. I know that it's very difficult to hide it because people saw that there were not people voting, but they could put it a little bit. And this was the lowest participation in the story of the Islamic Republic. Then, this is the way the elections work. There were one elections where people really believed that they faked the elections. The result was 2009. You were there. Green movement, people went to the streets and the protests were huge. But this is the system that makes elections. That's why the election of this Masoud Pezeshkian is kind of surprise. What will he do? Probably not much. But it's a surprise for the people, because until 3 years ago, reformists were totally banned of these elections and they couldn't present any candidate. And now they just let one of them and he won. It shows also how the population is sending very elegant message to the system to say, we don't trust you. We don't want you.
Is it like a way to put off the steam, so that's what I'm following. I'm not an expert of Iranian politics, but still, if you were there in 2009 during the Green Movement, there is something in your heart. When you come to a country during kind of this protest, seeing millions, young people hoping for the better, doing something, it stays with you forever. You have this sentiment and hope. You have some hope. For me, not having time and opportunity to, follow Iran, I'm hopeful, then disappointed, hopeful, disappointed. I think that we're all looking. And then people on the street. And then it's violently crashed down. And then so violently that you are appalled by the articles you read about treatments of these people in prison who are killed, murdered, tortured. So it's very violent. It's also very violent. How would you describe now the Iranian society after these waves of protest, which were there during various years?
That's why so many people would say, I'm not gonna vote. I'm not gonna, even if there is someone who can make my life a little bit better, I'm not gonna support this system, because people believe that they are using them for the elections, because the system always say, it's like a referendum. If you go and you vote and you have a big participation, it's not about who you vote for. It's about just sending a message, as Supreme Leader always say, to the world that Iran is a strong country. But still, the Iranian society is such a powerful, sophisticated, elegant, and brave society that they are really living a totally different life from what the system wants to put. And when I'm saying, it's not just about certain circle of the society. This is spreading to even to small cities. Society is learning that, of course, many of them are traditional, many of them are religious, but they are living with certain values and way of living that is totally opposing what the system, and the system knows.
But you still have a lot of conservative, like really conservative.
Of course, in Iran are many people who are traditional, conservative, that they pray and they read the Quran, even they use chador, the women. Doesn't mean that these people are supporting the system. Because many of them even criticize the abuse of religion that the system has done, that they create this double moral in the society. People who are really religious, sometimes they really don't support them because they believe that they are destroying this faith. They do their praise, their meetings, their religious feast, trying to do it separated for, of course, still you have millions of people. You have 13 millions of people who vote for Saeed Jalili. We are talking about over 80 millions, 61 are allowed or able to vote, and over this 61 million that's possible to vote, 13 of them vote for Saeed Jalili. That means, and the radicals and the people who support the system always vote. The people who don't vote are the others. Then you understand with this, the dimension. Of course, they are still very powerful. They have the intelligence, they have the security, they have the arms, they have the jails, anything. But you understand there that they are not the majority. It's clear. When the majority is able to go and to express themselves, they always say, look, these big demonstrations we make in a special moment. But the others never have the opportunity to go to the streets. Because when they go to the streets, they are repressed. Then it's a very interesting society, but let's see what is going to happen. Probably they are earning time, because if this radical president was going to win, the society was being under so much pressure that probably something bigger will happen. And probably they knew that. That's why they are giving some air to the society.
I would still finish with more geopolitical thing. But for us, we were often speaking about this kind of axis of evil. I don't like these terms, but to be honest, like Putin was in Pyongyang recently, like the way how it's really becoming the axis of evil. And, Iran in particular for us, because of the providing the weapon to Russia. What I understand, like just from the brief news, that there is some hope that maybe there would be some talks, and that at least it won't be that kind of antagonistic and tough relations. Not with the US, that would be always like that, but Europe. So is it like the chance that Iran wouldn't kind of move closer to Moscow, that it at least like would stay away, or the foreign policy isn't done by the president, but just by the clerics? So what it can mean for us?
The foreign policy at the end is decided by highest stance. Supreme Leader, National Security Council. Even Mohammad Javad Zarif, that this famous foreign ministry that negotiated the nuclear deal during the government of Hassan Rouhani, that probably, if they accepted and they allowed him, he will be back to be a foreign ministry, because this is part of the campaign of Masoud Pezeshkian. He always say that we execute. We are not the ones who make the politics. But at the same time, I think it's clear, Iran always have this politics, no west, not east. To be in the middle, not to be just in one side, not to be in the other side, just to try to have a balance in two sides. And I think what could come in this new government, but it's a decision that's to come from inside of the system, if they want to go a little bit more back to this balance, not to be just totally in one side, as the government of Ibrahim Raisi was. Of course, Iran is happy to be in the BRICS. Also, they have been negotiations and conversations, not directly with the United States and Europe, and they always keep this door open. Then I think probably we, again, depend on what the system has decided, because they need to take these economic sanctions out. The situation in Iran, economic situation, is very bad and has been in the political campaign. Then let's see what we will see, but probably we have a no more friendly, but more pragmatic approach, probably. But also will also depend on what happened when Donald Trump will come. That is also a question for Ukraine, for Iran, and for the rest of the world.
I want to finish with something human. I'm here in conversation with you, speaking about our experience as the correspondents who covering the wars. But, you've more experience than myself, like way more, especially in the covering the wars and in generally. So I really want to ask you for an advice. How do you organize your life as correspondent, being, everywhere all the time? Now you're in Ukraine, then the crash and Raisi dies, you're in Tehran. How you find your way to balance? And I'm not asking advice how to find help and rest, but generally, how do you organize your time between how you report, how much you can do, where is your limit, where you can stop, where you can do more, where you actually you see no, I'll better push more. Where do you find your energy?
The energy is not there anymore. I'm trying, the day I would have to confess that the day that I knew I was coming from Kharkiv to cover the first advance of the Russians in Kharkiv region after the 10th of May. I spent more than almost 10 days or something. And I just arrived in my house in Kyiv. I put the mobile and I knew that this helicopter of Raisi was crashed or they was disappeared. And I was lying to myself. I say, no, nothing happened. He will appear. I knew myself that they already knew. I mean, I know Iran so well to know that they were keeping this new. That day, in another time of my life, I would have bought the ticket immediately and the train and I would have gone. And I say, this was Sunday. I'm going to wait until they confirm. Of course, at 6 o'clock in the morning, I was live from Kyiv talking about what was going in Tehran, saying, yes, they already confirmed. Of course, I felt so tired because to go out of Ukraine is not easy, as all of you know. But, you have a compromise with stories, and I feel that I have a compromise with Ukraine, but also I have a compromise with Iran. In Ukraine, there are plenty of journalists who can go. In Iran, we have very few journalists who are allowed to go anytime because you need these visas and so on. I just need to be very pragmatic. When I am in a hurry, I need to know exactly what is the most important. This is the important. And you write this, When I have more time, I go for deeper reports and for something more sophisticated and to do the complex. But when I'm in this, I need to go to the essential. What is essential? He died, what the people die, what is going to happen, what is the feeling of the society. Boom, boom, boom. And I keep doing my job because otherwise I don't know. It's very A, B, C, D.
I've finished with, I think in Ukraine couldn't avoid that as well. But here you are for a workshop. Beyond the festival, you actually organize something very specific, and I think Ukrainians should know and appreciate that. So you brought here the festival with your participation. It's a workshop you really were running. 17 very senior, important editors and journalists from various Latin American countries for numbers of days with the topic of how to report the Russian invasion to Ukraine.
How to understand the complexity of this invasion.
Why did you do that? Why you find it's important? Because it's quite thin. It's a very senior people. I've been speaking to them for hours, showing something, and I thought wow, it's a privilege for us to really have a chance to speak to this type of people and make them interested at all this topic.
You talked for more than 3 hours and nobody stopped. Everyone was listening and we could continue for longer. It was a big challenge for me because I tried to read as much about Ukraine. I talk to all of you. I have a lot of friends. I try to, but I'm not an expert in Ukrainian history. I'm just learning little by little. Probably in 10 years, I can talk about Ukraine like I feel more confident to talk about Iran. But in this moment, I don't. But I try to do my best. Then what I did with this workshop was to telling them what I see in the field, in my reporting, how I do report, and what is the reality. And also, we brought so many other people to explain them the situation from the history point of view, another critical point of view, the disinformation, how the propaganda of Russia, how people who cover this war from OSINT, they do these tools of OSINT to cover Ukraine. We were so lucky that you accepted to come and as an Ukrainian journalist, war crime researchers, you as a person, to tell them what this war was. Then we put all this together and we create this workshop. And also, they also discovered that Latin America was not really far away from Ukraine. And the war on Ukraine was really having consequences, but not just consequences, but they have a lot of similarities in the way the conflicts, their life, the challenge as a society, as a government, as a politics. They found so many things. I'm so happy because I think we managed the goal that they went from here with, and I'm so happy, Natalia, because they went to the workshop until the last minute because they told me that in some workshop people never come back.
So really, I just really want to, clap you for this and thank you and the festival for that because, we Ukrainians try to do something, but it's very hard. But it's was your initiative and it really matters. So I really think that's really something to appreciate.
And you know what they understood at the end? That the Ukrainian war is not going to be in Ukraine if things continue like that. They understood that we are towards huge challenge for the future of our society. And this is going to be a very big scale problem in the future if things continue this way.
But we will do the best to kind of defend and protect and then it doesn't go further. Thank you so much.
Thank you.